And then recording. All right, Pete Giuliano. It is Wednesday, March 30th, 2022, and that makes this what?
236. SolderSmoke 236. Crank it in, Robert. Crank it in, Ralph.
Crank it in, Robert. Crank it in, Ralph. Pete, it has been a long time since we did a SolderSmoke podcast, but we have good excuses. I think we should explain. I think we have to explain to our listening and perhaps soon to be viewing audience. There's been some exciting developments. One of the reasons that there's been such a long delay in us getting SolderSmoke 236 out is actually it's a result of success. The big success that we had with putting out the video versions of the podcast. People really like the fact that we're recording in video and putting it up on YouTube and people can watch. But apparently it's not just our former podcast ham radio listeners who've been watching. Other people have been watching too.
Ooh.
So you and I both got an email a month and a half, 2 months ago saying, hey, we're kind of interested in the podcast. We'd like to make it not just a video cast, but we see cable TV potential, kind of specialized. These are from the people, we can't really mention the company yet, but it's the same group of people that put out these kind of specialized kind of tech.
Oh, like the fishing channel, and
like
the car
the fishing
stuff?
channel, the car channel. You and I
Yeah.
both watch the car channel,
Yeah.
the cooking channel, the whole home remodeling channel. All these, there's been these channels. You and I have mentioned it here from time to time. How come there's not kind of a ham radio channel, a ham radio home brewing channel? Well, when they took a look at the video, Pete, I was shocked because apparently you and I are more telegenic than we thought.
Ooh.
I definitely thought I had a face for radio.
Yeah.
But I always knew that you were ready for the big screen, especially with
I need to start wearing my bow tie
and everything else. But they liked it, so they actually, and this provided a good excuse. They said that they wanted to meet with us out there on the left coast in La La Land. And since you're out there, I mean, this is great. I never had the chance to meet you before. Now we got out there, got to meet you, and we went down and we talked to the suits.
Woo.
And I was skeptical all along, but I figured, what the heck? We're going out there. I get a chance to meet Pete, get to go fly cross continental, get out of the cold Northeast, get into that nice Southern California sunshine. And we talked to them, and they were really interested. We told them what it was about. We told them what we do. They said they liked the craft aspect of it. They said they thought it would appeal to their audience. Now, again, this is from the same group that kind of put on. I remember the show Orange County Choppers, where they would make motorcycles.
Yeah.
But they have to have conflict. They have to have kind
the toodles.
Yes. Yeah, right. They have to have something, a fight going on among the characters. And so there they had the Tuttle, right? The old man would fight against the son, and they would have arguments about design. So they asked us if there was any potential for conflict between the two of us. And we said, oh, yeah. Pete's got the digital VFOs, and I've got the analog VFOs. They didn't even know what that was, but they saw potential for conflict. They said, great, you guys can argue about that and everything else. Look, these things, they're never done until they're really done. So all they've committed to so far is a pilot. And I understand this is sort of standard practice out there. We've already shot the pilot. We did it. They set up a little workshop for us. We did a lot of clips, a lot of videos and stuff. So the pilot is now, as they say in the business, in the can. And it's going to come out soon, and we're going to see how it goes. So I think everybody who's interested in this should keep an eye open and an ear open for when this thing is going to come on and what channel. At that point, we'll be able to divulge more. For now, just send us an email at soldersmoke.yahoo.com, soldersmoke@yahoo.com, soldersmoke, one word, @yahoo.com, and we'll put you on the list for notifications for when this thing actually hits the cable systems. But it's going to be called the SolderSmoke Shop. It's going to feature you and me, and we're going to be talking about building radios and arguing about what's better, the SI5351 or analog VFOs. We might even talk about homebrew filters versus commercial filters, things like that. All the
There you
same
go.
stuff we talk about here.
Yeah, there you go.
It was great. It was great to get out there to La La Land. Get the
Yeah,
left
well,
coast.
you know, the other positive side of this thing is they're talking about supplying us a wardrobe. They didn't like my threads.
Well, they definitely they said they got to get me a better haircut too. I think you're good. You might get a few free berets out of this thing too, because the beret, they like the beret thing. Yeah, the whole chick magnet thing they like. Anyway, stay tuned. Send us an email and we'll put you on the list for notification on which channel this thing will be on, because there's like a million channels. There's like 1,000 channels. I can't keep track of it. Let us know. We'll let us know that you're interested, and then we'll put you on the list. Hey, one other thing I wanted to mention. I went to a ham fest on Sunday.
Yes.
I know. I have to struggle sometimes, but listen, this was the first time we missed 2 Winterfest ham fests here because of the pandemic. So Winterfest was finally back. And I had another motive for going, and that is because our friend Dean KK4DAS is now the president of the Vienna Wireless Society of Vienna, Virginia, which is my local club. And so anyway, a while back, Dean contacted me and said, hey, look, we're going to do a forum, kind of a presentation on home brewing, and would you come along? And I said, man, Dean, I don't even know if I'm going to the ham fest, so let's wait. So I waited until almost literally the last minute. He contacted him and said, yeah, if you'd like me to be there, I'll sit with you and we could talk a little bit about home brewing. He put together a really nice presentation.
Yes, I saw
nice slides. I'm glad you saw it. You were watching it. And it was nice. We have it up on the SolderSmoke blog. Now you have to go to the start point because it's like a 5-hour long live stream video that they've got up there. But I note the point at which we start talking about homebrew and SolderSmoke. So if you go to that point and just start from there, you could get to the important stuff in the video. but you know, a couple other things. It was interesting to see the ham fest, because I think the ham fest is a way to get a view of what's happening in ham radio. And one thing I noticed, and this in part may be the result of the 2-year hiatus that we've been dealing with, but it also reflects something that we've been hearing on the internet and other on the air, people talking about it. Man, there were a lot of boat anchors, really nice boat anchors. I mean, early Collins gear, Collins S lines, KWM2s, big old Hammerlands, nice rigs, really in good shape. And they were moving. And Dean told me that by the end of the Hamfest, most of them had been sold. But they weren't moving nearly as fast as they were just a few years ago. I remember that to get anywhere near rigs like that, you had to show up at like dark 30 as guys were unloading their U-Haul vans full of the stuff and make an offer as they were carrying it in. And if you didn't, well, forget it. You weren't going to get them. They were lingering there a lot longer. The other thing I noticed was something similar happening with old analog test equipment, the old Tech scopes. I have an old Tech 465 scope with a complete set of manuals and everything that AL7RV gave me a while back, W8 NSA now. And it failed on me, and I replaced it with the Rigel scope that they were all using now. But I always had it in mind. I said, man, somebody would really love this Tech 465 scope because they can fix it up and then they can use it. I don't know, because at the Hamfest there was a large quantity of working old scopes that were selling for not a lot of money, and they weren't even moving. I think they eventually moved at the end, but they were all selling for like $100 or something like that. And I thought these things I thought it'd be worth a lot more than that. But again, there's apparently a lot of this stuff out there. There's kind of a glut in the market. I think that the test gear might be affected by the availability of the digital storage scopes like we're using, like the Rigel scopes. They're small, they're light, they don't break.
Computer interface to store data.
Interface. They've got Fourier transforms in there. You could do math with them. There's all kinds of stuff that you couldn't do with an old Tech analog scope. So all of this made me think that I had chosen wisely in deciding not to go out to the to the tailgate area with my car full of old junk, because I probably would have sat there in the cold all morning and not sold any of it. So it was cold too. It was like we've had cold weather out here on the East Coast last week.
I saw pictures of you with a sweater and a coat.
Oh man, and I was still cold out there. I was glad to get back and get inside in the heated area. It was cold. It was like Winterfest from days gone by. But anyway, it was great. It was great fun to get to the Hamfest. I actually enjoyed it. I talked to Dean. We did the presentation. I met up with my old friend Armand, WA1UQO. I mentioned during the presentation that a piece of equipment that he had given me, the mixer, had made its way into the 1712 rig. Yeah, and so I was trying to explain to the newcomers the spirit of ham radio homebrew. I said, we don't. It's a lot less harsh. It's not as harsh as the computer world, where they seem to like to haze the noobs, as they call them. I said, man, we don't haze noobs. We help novices. We kind of share stuff. We share equipment parts. If some guy needs something, we give it to him. And I pointed to Armand's providing of the mixer chip as an example. I also met up with Charles, AI40T, and I seem to run into Charles every Hamfest. A great guy from here in Northern Virginia, and he was braving the cold weather out there in the tailgate area. But he and I had a good talk, and I put a picture of myself with Charles and with Armand up there on the blog page along with the recording of the presentation that we made. So check that out. So it's been good. It was good to be back at the in-person Hamfest. It's almost like we're getting back to a semblance of normal, I hope. But Pete, what has been going on your bench between our visits out to La La Land and the suits and everything else? You must have been doing. I know you've been doing some radio.
Yeah, not too much. Many people don't know my ex-YL has not been in the best of health. She was in a hospital actually for about 2 months, and she's now home. So a lot of my time is consumed with caregiving. So not too much bench time. Although, if you get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, you can't look at stuff. you forego sleeping. Forego sleeping. So everybody gets a measure. It's just a little hard on you personally. But a couple of things I wanted to share. First of, this worldwide chip shortage, I think some people are taking advantage of it, and we're on the disadvantage end of it. The SI570 chip, the one with the low phase noise made by, is now a company owned by Skyworks. Single lot chips were selling for about $15 here 5-6 months ago. Skyworks bought Silicon Labs, and now that chip is $40. $40 for just the chip, and that doesn't get you the rest of the hardware. So I discovered that there's a couple of alternative chips out there, boards, actually. Max, the Max company makes a lot of specialty chips. They have the 2870, which is the whole board is like in the $40 range with a device on it. It'd be programmable. But the short side of that is in the literature it says this particular chip can be programmed with an Arduino or controlled with an Arduino, or it can be controlled with a computer, or you can use a USB port. And then it says, but we have no information on the computer or USB port. So, if you want to hook this into a computer to control it like you would with the Quest software on a software-defined radio, you can't. The information is just not there. But the board's there with an Arduino, and of course you're somewhat limited in what you can do with the Arduino. So I'm saying it's good to see that there are some alternatives out there, but at the same time,
we need somebody to come up and write the program. And use the Max 2870. You put an appeal on your blog, and I put an appeal on mine, saying, hey, all of you software wizards out there, please step forward and say you could write us a program. Have you heard from anybody?
Yeah, I did get some response. As a matter of fact, some guy as a PhD project took that, and he built this signal generator from DC to 1 gigahertz.
Wow.
He was using this board, But it's pretty complex because there's a lot of software behind the thing. I mean, it's more than just a radio. This is a piece of serious test instrumentation, but someone did put me onto it, and the code for that, it's got to use a Mega 2560. It's a specialized form of Arduino. There's another one, Analog Devices has a 5341, same basic idea, but the problem is they produce this amazing hardware, but there's very little software support for it. I mean, if you're hiding in a closet, techno geeky type, you're there. But if you just want to implement it into a radio project and don't want to just develop software, you're somewhat on the short end of the stick from that standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I really hope that somebody out there who can come up with good, simple code for the Max 2870 will step forward and sort of write the code for us, for the whole group.
Yeah.
And I put on my blog page, Pete, just sort of tongue in cheek, I said, opportunities to help Pete Giuliano, SolderSmoke, don't come along every day, because Pete basically knows everything and has built everything. I said, but you admitted that writing a whole software package like this might be best left to somebody who's a software engineer. Right. So, okay, software engineers, can somebody come up and write a simple program that will allow us, Pete, to do with the Max 2870 board and an Arduino what we want it to do, and solve the whole chip supply chain problem here for users of digital equipment in ham radio. So, hey, Pete, this week we could fight about this in the next episode. I can make fun of the 2870, and I can talk about how I bought a capacitor, and you could pour scorn on that.
Hey, didn't you end up with a box of capacitors from the Hamfest?
I did.
Wow.
And there are many, many analog VFOs in that box.
Yeah, you showed me a picture. Yeah, it was an exciting box.
Good. We'll talk about that in a minute. But anyway, I thought that was really interesting about the 2870 and the search for software. You had a good piece on the blog on using tapped capacitance for impedance matching.
Yes.
And that's an important topic. That's not discussed a lot. We're really used to tapped inductors or transformers, where you put 2 or 3 turns, and then that becomes the 50 ohms when the LC circuit's actually higher impedance. But tapping capacitors the way you did is another really useful and important technique. And I'm glad you went into it in some detail. So it's check out Pete's blog for information on that. I linked to it on the SolderSmoke blog. And Pete, the Peashooter.
Yes.
What's happening with the Peashooter?
Well, it's interesting you should mention the Peashooter. I was waiting for 2 critical components to go in the Peashooter, and they were non-electronic, some aluminum. I ordered some aluminum plate, and I found it on Amazon, but it came from Taiwan. So you had to wait till this. I mean, we don't make aluminum here in the United States anymore. You want to get aluminum, it's got to come from either China or Taiwan. So I wanted to get a front panel, put a front panel on it. But the Peashooter is an offshoot of the P3ST. Someone says they got tired of saying the SSSSS, so they say P3ST. And this one uses mimics instead of the transistors. And I've got it working. It's just it doesn't have a front panel. So soon, I hope that I can steal some time at 3 o'clock in the morning. go out
if the Taiwanese boat comes in.
Yeah, so I could make the front panel. But actually, someone else, Bill Costello. I sent you some pictures. He built the Peashooter, and he's got that working. He used it in the DX contest. I think he worked 14 countries.
Wow.
14 countries with the Peashooter. So, hey, it's pretty nice. It's small, compact, and my goal.
I saw that, and he had really a novel approach to boxing it up.
Yes.
I had never seen this before. This takes al fresco and kind of improvised boxing to a new level. What this guy did was he needed some place to put the boards and the speaker and the switches. We've all been there. So he used the mailing cardboard box that a lot of the stuff came in.
Yes.
It's ugly, but it gets you there.
It's a whole new term for a post office box, right?
Talk about repurposing. There you go.
Yeah, it was cool. Cool looking. Yeah, very nice.
Anyways, that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then finally, one thing I really liked that I saw on your blog that I thought was really useful was your comments, tribal knowledge on making enclosures. Now, we definitely, everybody needs help on this. I especially need help on this. Let me tell you a story. When we did the presentation at the Vienna Wireless Society, I had brought with me my Mythbuster transceiver, right? Which I am quite proud of, by the way. And I actually brought a little battery and turned it on so you could see the glowing Giuliano blue numerals in there, the band switch going from 20 to 75 meters, a little bit of hiss from the speaker on the enclosure inside. And I had it on the table, and one person who had been a very attentive participant in the whole presentation, and she was being very nice about it. She said, "Really interesting rig, great work on that, but your cabinetry really needs some improvement." And I said, "Yeah, that's definitely not my strong suit. That's probably why I stick with plywood, because if it's bad in plywood, can you imagine how bad it would be if it was actually in metal?" So anyway, but you got some great ideas on that, and you put them up on the blog.
Yeah, I did. Actually, a long time ago, I adopted a standard using 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch aluminum angle stock.
Yeah.
And you can use all sorts of materials. Matter of fact, the aluminum is kind of spendy these days, but you can get PC board. And there's no reason why you can't make the front panel and the back panel on a PC board. I've got a lot of rigs with it, and it paints well. I mean, believe it or not, you can paint over it, and it looks just, you don't even know it's a piece of PC board. And in many respects, it's easier to work with because I can actually mill it out on my CNC, you know, the holes for bezels and meters and things of that sort. But I adopted the standard of using the 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch aluminum stock, and it works perfect. You have front, back, sides, what have you. And matter of fact, I'm going to show you something when I get the front panel on the Peashooter. One of the problems has always been you can mount it at the bottom with a piece of angle stock, but you get a flex in the panel. You know, the front panel is flexing back unless you support it from behind. So I've come up with a novel idea for supporting that front panel so it won't flex.
Oh man!
And you'll see that in the Peashooter. So that was another thing. I was waiting for the metal because I got some really thin gauge metal, and boy, that thing would just flop back and forth. So you'll see that when I get the front panel on the Peashooter.
One of my first receivers, the first one, I think the actual first superhead receiver that I built was the bare bones superhead that I talk about all the time. I've since built 3-4 other versions of them, and I got a kit. Dale Parfit recently sent me a kit of Far Circuit's board for the bare bones superhead. But the first one I built was scratch built, and I faced this problem of what am I going to enclose it in. I had never built anything to the point where I actually had to build an enclosure. So I put this piece of flimsy aluminum on it, but like you said, it was flexing all over the place and it was not stable. So then I put another piece and another piece, and I think I ended up with 4 pieces. It was like a laminate, and it finally got rigid enough so it wasn't floating all over the place. But it is a problem. But take a look at Pete's blog page. I've linked to it on the SolderSmoke blog. Tribal knowledge on making enclosures. Good stuff, Pete. I hope people will be following your lead on all that. Hey, speaking of enclosures, I have behind me, I'm pointing to it. This is the 1712 rig. It has a front panel on it right now. I had it just al fresco, just sitting there with all the guts exposed. And I kind of liked it that way. We talked about this at the Vienna Wireless Society, how you're reluctant to put an enclosure on it because you can't look at the magnificence of your electronics as easily. I actually thought about getting a piece of plexiglass and putting plexiglass so I could look through at the different parts. But I had this piece of plywood from the delivery of the pandemic treadmill, and I decided to use it. So I cut it out. It turned out this was a bit thicker than the one I had used on the Mythbuster rig. So I had a little bit of trouble getting the controls to come through the front panel, but I got them in there. And I only have one. I have a band switch control, I have the main frequency control, I have an audio gain control, and I have a jack for the microphone. the rig is working on both 17 and 12. Now, just let me describe this a little bit because I've talked about it, but I'll just recap. It is essentially a band imaging receiver. Like the Mythbuster, one of the frequencies is above the IF and the other is below the IF. And we just use the addition or subtraction of the VFO frequency to get to the two different bands. This is a simple way to do it. The Mythbuster, the two bands are 75 meters and 20 meters, and the IF is at 5 megahertz. So you add 9 megahertz to 5, and it gets you to 14. You subtract 5 megahertz from 9, and it gets you down into the 75 meter band. And you could do that on 75 and 20 without having to do an additional BFO or carrier oscillator frequency, because one band is low LSB, one band is USB. On the 1712 rig, the arrangement is such that you do not have any sideband inversion for either of the frequencies. On 12 meters, you are adding the BFO frequency, the VFO frequency to the carrier oscillator frequency. The IF is 21.4. So that's the carrier oscillator frequency, 21.475 to be precise. And then you're adding a VFO frequency and gets you up into the 24.9 megahertz range, which is 12 meters. On the other side, you're subtracting the VFO frequency from the carrier oscillator frequency. You're moving in the other direction, so you're at upper sideband on both. All right, so it works out pretty well because you're subtracting 3.5 from 3.5, which does not have the modulation. You're subtracting it from the 21.4, which has the modulation. So you're not. This is the Hallis rule, and it doesn't violate the Hallis rule. So on this rig, also, you do not need two different carrier oscillator frequencies, but it's basically band imaging with the two work bands, 12 and 17, in there. Now, I had some apprehension when I was building it. I was wondering if this is going to work, because I was going to end up with bad, spurs or images. But I knew the receivers were working great, and I had no problems, no birdies, no real problems there. And then when I started getting the transmitters going, I built the RF power amplifier stages. Right away, I was making contacts right away on 17, and just a few days later on 12. So I'm now making contacts on both bands, and it's there's still some little problems to work out, kind of interesting problems. For example, I want to have a frequency readout, a digital frequency readout on this rig, similar to what I had on the Mythbuster rig. So I'm going to use a little Sanjian frequency counter, but the Sanjian frequency counter cannot be made to work. But what's the matter?
Well, the subtraction thing, negative subtraction.
Yeah, that's the problem. You've identified the problem. I can't do it. It won't get both bands. It worked with the Mythbuster. It won't work here because you have to specify the IF. So my IF is 21.47. And then for the band where I'm subtracting, you have to basically subtract the VFO frequency, because you're going to input the VFO frequency. The VFO is running around 3.5, but 3.5 minus 21.47
is a negative number.
Is a negative number, and this thing doesn't handle negative numbers.
Yeah.
So the whole thing goes kaput. But I have a scheme. Let me ask you, see what you think about this. So here's what I want to do. I'm going to put the Sanjian counter on the front panel. Behind it, in the little Altoids box, I'm going to build a mixer. It may be an NE602. It may be an SBL1. To the mixer, I'm going to take a sample of the carrier oscillator frequency, which is around 21.47 right there, and is fixed, and a sample of the VFO frequency. There's going to be a band switching relay inside the little box. On one side, it's going to select for adding the two, the sum product, and the other side, it's going to select for the Subtraction product. And so that should give me the 17 meter frequency in one position and the 12 meter frequency in the other position. And I'm going to run the output right into the Sanjian counter. In that way, I think that'll actually give a very accurate readout of what the frequency is, right? Does that sound good to you?
I actually have done that.
All right, good. Which rig did you do it with?
If you look on the JES Systems website, jessystems.com, there's a tri-bander rig. And what I did is I put a series of bandpass filters on the output of the of the mixer. And then you selected, based on the band, you selected the right bandpass filter. So you take a look at that. That's how I did it there because of the mixing process that I had to go through.
Right.
That'll work.
I mean, I have bandpass filters in there for the rig that are working now.
But I have a separate set of bandpass filters.
That's what I realized. I tried to figure out a way that I could use the bandpass filters that I already built, and there was just no way to do it because it would work on transmit but not on receive or something like that.
Parts.
I know. That's it. You might not even have to go to dual tune circuits. You might be able to do it with just one tank circuit.
I did the dual tune.
Dual tune. I might do that too, but I could fit it all into a little Altoids box. Now, what kind of mixer did you use?
SBL ones.
All right. See, this is the radio gods have spoken, Pete. Because the other day, I'm on Facebook looking for ham radio stuff, and it spots an ad. Somebody way out on the West Coast, I think it's Salem, Oregon, is selling 5 brand new SBL1 mixers. I said, man, $20, let's go. Boom. It's on the way. It should arrive today. So I might put that in there. I think that's the best way to do it. Then I won't have to worry about power.
Just look at the tri-band, the 2009 tri-band transceiver.
Man, I am so pleased that I came up independently with a solution that you did also. I mean, great. This shows that I'm on the right track here. All right.
Yes, it'll work. It works. It'll work beautifully.
Speaking about being on the right track, you and I have disagreements about analog VFOs, but it's mostly just a shtick, as they say in Hollywood. It's sort of an opportunity to kind of disagree. But I really liked Mike Murphy, WU2D. He did a series of videos on how to build a VFO, how to properly build a VFO. And he had a lot of good ideas in there. He was taking a lot of it from Frank Harris's book, K0IYE, his book From Crystal Sets to Sideband. And Frank shares a lot of tribal wisdom that he's picked up over the years in building things. And so Mike was relaying a lot of that. I did a lot of reading from Joe Carr. He wrote a lot about how to build VFOs. So there was great information from all of them. Also, Doug DeMaw had a lot of guidance on things to do or don't do when building VFOs. So I adopted bits and pieces of most of it. Now, I didn't go the full Frank Harris in building the VFO. Frank recommended building the whole thing in a hermetically sealed die-cast box. And it was almost like if you don't do it this way, you're doomed to drift. But then I started thinking about it. I have never really built a VFO that way, and I've had VFOs that don't really drift. The other thing is, if you look at most of the gear that we buy, the commercial gear, the Boatanchor gear, even when they had tubes in these things, they didn't have the VFO in a die-cast, hermetically sealed box. If you look at rigs like the Micro BitX or the BitX20 or the BitX40 module, even when they were running analog VFOs, they didn't have it, they didn't have it all boxed up. The HW101 VFO is not in a hermetically sealed box. So I think that there may have been some wisdom there, but it may have been kind of overkill. A lot of people get very kind of obsessive about shielding each individual stage in a rig. You got to put every stage has got to be in its own box. It's got to be grounded. There's got to be, RF connectors and DC decoupling all the way through. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I think that this is an example of how the perfect can be the enemy of the good. If you try to do that, it might make homebrewing so difficult and daunting that you never actually get anything built because you're shooting for this perfection. Whereas if you say, hey, wait a second, I'm going to use prudent shielding, I'm going to keep outputs away from inputs, I'm going to use toroidal inductors, I'm going to use shielded cable, I'm going to use a sensible layout and space everything out as much as I can, then you could avoid the kind of problems that would come that would require you to put everything in boxes. Anyway, so I followed most of the advice in WU2D's video, and I used this capacitor, Pete, that you recommended that I get. It turned out it was the capacitor from an HT37. And in Mike's video, he was talking about temperature compensation. I have never attempted temperature compensation before. I usually got lucky and the thing was stable. But Mike, relaying with words of wisdom from Frank, said, you really got to think about temperature compensation, even on simple solid state VFOs. If not, it's going to drift. I was sitting there reading this and I looked up from the bench, and on the shelf in front of me was the capacitor from the HT37 that you had recommended. And I started looking at it more carefully. It had temperature compensation caps in there. It had a split stator capacitor that allowed you to dial it in. If you put this thing on and you turned it on, if it was drifting too much in one direction, you turn the capacitor in one direction. If it's drifting too much in another direction, you turn it in the other direction until you get the thing stable. And I did that with this VFO that I built, and I was able to almost completely eliminate the drift.
You should mention that there's that split stator capacitor has in series with it two different capacitors that have different temperature coefficients.
That's right, but they have the same capacitance value.
Same value, but different
right.
temperature,
different,
like N750 or
N1500. You're bringing into the circuit a different temperature compensation, a different temperature coefficient. And you're, in essence, being able to match up to counteract usually the positive temperature coefficient that comes from the coil. It's usually the coil. Also, the importance of air-tuned coil. Anyway, I love this circuit. Mike mentioned this circuit. He actually built a split stator capacitor and showed it. And it suddenly dawned on me, what an ingenious piece of circuitry. It came out of Helicrafters. The HT44, I think, was the first one to use it. Then it was in the HT37. Then get this, Pete, this was really cool. The FT101 VFO that you mentioned, that you told me to get. Now I have two of them. One of them is in the Mythbuster. The other one's on the shelf behind me. But somebody looked at it and said, from the UK, I forget the call sign, but he sends me a message and he says, hey, Bill, that split stator capacitor trick, that's in the FT101 circuit also. And I flipped the thing over and I looked underneath it, and sure enough, you can see staring you right in the face a split stator capacitor with two caps in there of different value.
But HT44, HT37 has non-linear VFO diodes, and the FT101 does.
Yes, the FT101 does. And your question is a good one. If they knew how to do this, why didn't they do it more? Yeah, a good question. I think a lot of them were using the series-tuned Colpitts, which is a variation of the Vaker or the Vacker. And I think that leads to a lot more linear frequency readout, a lot less bunching up at the top. One final note about temperature compensation, because I really got into this kind of thing. At the Hamfest, one of the things I bought was, I spotted there in like the estate sales section in a box underneath where all the good stuff usually is, what was clearly the remnants of an ARC-V command set. I mean, this thing, it was beat up. I mean, this thing looked like it had actually been shot down by the Nazis, all right? And has been in a barn someplace since the shoot down, all right? Bad. But I figured, okay, I understand there's a nice variable capacitor in there, so I'm going to get it. $5 later, it was in my bag. I brought it home. It turned out it's the navigation receiver, R23. There are many different versions of the ARC-V command set receiver and transmitter. First of all, I ended up with a receiver. People, I think, use the capacitor out of the transmitter more commonly for VFOs. But there was a nice variable capacitor in there for the receiver. But I remember in Mike WU2D's video, he mentioned temperature compensation in the ARC5 transmitter. This would be really important because they got a VFO in the transmitter. And we're talking about airplanes that went from sea level up to freezing cold. The early bombers, frostbite was a real problem for the crew members. It got so cold up there. They had to put them in electric suits. It was really bitterly cold. So can you imagine, this is a piece of tube type equipment with big old tubes in there going up to altitude, to freezing altitude. And anyway, I started thinking there's got to be temperature compensation in there. So I started digging in the old manuals. Mike mentioned it in the transmitter. I was just wondering, they had to have it in the receiver too. And sure enough, there it is. There's two capacitors in there in the ARC5 command set.
Are the IF transformers okay in that receiver?
The what?
IF transformers.
I haven't checked them. They could
okay,
be
well, snag those because that could make a heck of a sideband transceiver because they're 85 kilohertz.
I know I could use them, and I got a bunch of other them floating around here. And this sort of harks back to what we see in the Drake 2B, where they're the final IF and the Drake 2B is at 50 kilohertz.
Yes.
So very low, and they were able to get 500
great selectivity,
500
yes.
Hertz, without even turning on the Q multiplier.
Yeah.
So good stuff. You had a good idea. I found myself thinking about this. I don't know if we'll go with the tubes. It might be cool to make a solid state one.
Yes.
Solid state ARC5. All right.
There you go.
Anyway, good stuff. Hey, couple of things I wanted to mention just before we move on here. I've decided to get a little bit more rigorous about receiver design. I realize that I'm sort of just putting circuits together very much along the BitX model. Just, okay, if you got some amplifiers, you got some mixers. Farhan always said that you only need to know how to build 4 circuits: an amplifier circuit, an oscillator circuit, a mixer circuit, and I think that's it. Amplifiers, oscillators, mixers. That's about it. If you build those 3, you can combine them and produce transceivers. And that's true. But then when you start reading, Sherwood, Wes Hayward, and others, you start to realize that there's more to it than that. There's gain distribution. There's dynamic range. There's IMD. There's the OIP3. There's distortion, harmonic distortion, all this stuff. It's a pretty complicated topic that I have been just sort of not paying attention to. So I guess one of my resolutions for 2022 is to try to get more rigorous about this stuff. And I found one really good article that I liked. I put a link to it on the blog, and I found one really nice video that I liked, where the guy was talking about using some simple test gear to check the noise level on your receiver, to check the signal to noise ratio, to check for harmonic distortion. And we discovered that he was using a signal analyzer. And I said, oh man, I don't have a signal analyzer. But he was using an audio signal analyzer, and it was based on the sound card in his computer, and you can get freeware from it. So we downloaded that. Tony Fishpool and I were talking about this. We downloaded it. And I have a question. In the video, he talks about, and some of the other authors talk about using a true RMS audio voltmeter to test your receiver for things like IMD, harmonic distortion, noise floor, things like that. But my question is, do I need to get a true RMS audio voltmeter, or can I get the same information from the audio signal analyzer that we got for free and the sound card in my computer? I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether you need one.
Why can't you use your scope?
Yeah, I don't know whether the scope, I guess you could use the scope, sure. I don't know, but for some reason, guys with scopes were also recommending that you needed to get one of these true RMS voltmeters.
Well, it's only that the scope is uses an averaging, whereas the an analog type true RMS voltmeter would not use an averaging. You'd see peaks and that sort of thing that you smooth out. It'd be smooth out. Yeah.
RMS. Yeah. I think true RMS is the key there. So I don't know. Anyway, I'm thinking about this, and I guess the only other thing I did in radio recently was I got the 6 EA8 replacements for the 6 U8s. We were talking bad about the 6 U8s. Grayson told us, don't badmouth the 6 U8s. They're pretty good, but they're kind of old and they're long in the tooth, Pete. And they say
I got some too. I haven't plugged them in yet, but I got some too.
Some what? Some 6 EA8s?
Yeah.
So did I think, and so did Scott, who was working on the Made for the Mighty Midget. I plugged the 6 EA8s into my Made for the Mighty Midget, and it perked up immediately. It was like it was rejuvenated. I hit it with the fountain of youth for tube type receivers. I bought a fourth 6 EA8 to replace the mixer tube in my Drake 2B. You know, there's a 6U8 in the 2B. And if that's similarly aging, that might be dragging down the performance of the Drake 2B. I have it sitting on top, and I'll replace that, and I'll report back on what we have there. Pete, it's now time for the Shameless Commerce Division.
Yes.
And we have to talk because we actually have a sponsor. This is great. We don't, we're not out there hounding ICOM or Kenwood or Yaesu to sponsor us. No, but occasionally somebody will come to us and say, I want to sponsor a SolderSmoke podcast. And we got that inquiry from a guy that we talked to a while back. This is Carlos. His company is called PartsCandy. One word altogether, Parts, plural, Candy. He's on eBay. I have a link to his eBay store on the SolderSmoke blog in the left-hand column. It's hard to miss. It's near the top on the left-hand column. And to get to his store, just click on it. Carlos is one of us. He is an electronics tinkerer. And he started to realize, I think, that a lot of the test leads, clip leads that hams and other tinkerers were using were really not good. I had so many really crappy test leads where you could see they just had a piece of wire, they had 2 alligator clips, they used a crimping tool, and they kind of hoped that it made good contact. Sometimes it would make good contact, sometimes it wasn't. Exactly what you don't need in a clip lead. You need it to make good contact all the time. Carlos answered that by using high quality alligator clips, good quality wire, and personally hand soldering all the wires to the clip leads. So you know that there's a good electrical connection in there. I ordered a set of clip leads or alligator leads from Carlos. When they arrived, I immediately threw out all of the other clip leads that I had laying around the shack. And I've only used his, so since that time, I've never had a problem with a bad clip lead. So if you're looking for test leads, clip leads, take a look at PartsCandy on eBay. His store is there. Carlos is, like I said, a good guy. And you can get to his store just by going on the left-hand column of the SolderSmoke blog, and you'll see the ad for PartsCandy. Just click on the picture, and it'll take you right to Carlos's store. He has the alligator clips. He has a variety of other test leads that you could find and use there, and we strongly recommend it. I can strongly recommend it based on personal experience using this stuff. So thanks very much to PartsCandy for letting us for being our sponsor here, Pete. We haven't had a sponsor for a long time. We're moving up in the world on TV, getting sponsors. I'm telling you, man.
Finally.
It'll be impressive. Hey, that brings us to SolderSmoke mailbag. Bong. I got to get the gong back in there. I somehow lost it somewhere along the way. Hey, we got some really good mail. Walter KA4KXX, our old friend in Orlando.
Sunrise.
He's been home brewing for a long time. He does alfresco home brewing. He builds SSB rigs. Walter's just awesome. He had a question a while back, and it was a good question about the diodes in the amplifiers in the original BitX20. Not the TIAs, but the original BX20 had diodes in there, and one for receive, one for transmit on each of the amplifiers. And his question was, why? Why were they there? And why did they disappear on subsequent BitX designs? So a busy guy, another busy guy is Farhan. Farhan's a very busy guy. He's got all kinds of things going on in his life over there in Hyderabad. But I managed to get in touch with Farhan and asked him, I said, hey, look, Walter wants to know about what the diodes were for. Farhan came back and said that they were there to prevent the reverse junction of the off transistor from conducting and clipping the waveform. So unless you had that diode in there to fully shut down the other transistor, he's right. A voltage peak coming across might cause that off transistor's junction to conduct when it shouldn't. So a good answer there. And apparently it satisfied Walter's curiosity about this thing. Thanks very much, Walter, and thanks, Farhan, for providing the answer. I've been talking to Tony, G4WIF. Tony, always great to correspond with him, and a good guy to talk to about test gear. He and I were talking about this audio test gear, noise factor, IMD, harmonic distortion kind of thing. And he also got involved, and we was talking about, and you were talking to him also, Pete, about the parasets and using the parasets in occupied territory and how hazardous that might have been. Tony mentioned G3ROO, over there in Dorset. Ian and his paraset, and I remember that way back in 2007, 2008, I had actually been to Dorset, to Ian's shack, to the ROO shack, and actually had called CQ with his paraset. It was a thrill, man. It was great.
I noted one thing in that picture, Bill.
Yeah.
Your hair was darker.
I know. It's true. Yes, it's true. Yeah. Time flies. Anyway, one of the things, I don't know if people understand this, but ROO is his call sign, RU. And this led to the name of the company, Kanga Parts. Get it? Kangaroo. Get it? Okay. A little bit of ham radio trivia there. Talking to Todd, K7TFC out there in Portland. Todd is a great guy. He came up with these little boards for Tia amps, and I got a bunch of them and used them in the 1712 rig. I put the parts in there, set it at the amplification that I wanted, and got the Tias that I used in the 1712 rig. And Todd was also commenting. Dean had commented on the pine boards that I used as the base for this rig, and Todd was wondering if they had any kind of special RF properties. And Dean, of course, jokingly said that they do, and I just said, well, it's just Frank Jones. Frank Jones liked pine boards, so Frank Jones put in a good word with the radio gods, and off we go.
You know where that really came from?
Where'd that come from?
Because in the old days, hams used to work on the kitchen table, and the cutting boards in the kitchen were usually a pine board. So they pull out the cutting board, build the circuit on that.
I think that's definitely
right in the kitchen
table.
table.
The term breadboarding.
Yeah,
breadboarding. They would also often steal their mother's breadboard and build it on the breadboard. It's actually a great way, I think, to build things these days. And so I'm a big pine board.
Peter Parker uses the plastic boards. He puts a grid on it, puts the screws in there, and he just solders everything up. So he's taking that the next step.
That's it. Yeah. That's an old technique. You see that in the Ladybird books by George Dobbs and others. They would put screws in and then use the screws as sort of like terminals. A different way of doing it. Yeah. We mentioned Dean, KK4DAS. Dean has also been building variable oscillators, but he was trying to use the ceramic variable oscillators that I had used on 40. And I may have jumped the gun here, Pete, because I was bragging about the stability of my variable oscillator using a ceramic resonator. All right, I use a ceramic resonator on 40 meters, and I said it was remarkably stable, and I even said it might meet Giuliano criteria for oscillator stability.
Maybe.
I don't know whether it was quite there. Now I've kind of grown. I've gotten more demanding of my VFOs, and Dean told me that it was only drifting like 5 hertz a minute. And I said, man, 5 hertz a minute. That's just horrible. That would send the denizens of 40 meters and their waterfalls into, radio frequency apoplexy. I mean, they'd be falling out of their chairs in horror. So we'll have to see. I mean, I think it is possible to build more stable VFOs just following the advice of Frank Harris and Joe Carr and Doug DeMaw. I mentioned Mike W2D, the VFOs and temperature compensation, and the ARC5s. I got a nice package from Chris, KD4PBJ, and I know you got one too. What a great guy Chris is. He's got a lot of parts, and he sent us just the kind of care packages that we need to replenish the stock here. Thanks very much,
well,
Chris.
It makes a difference when you're a home brewer because you know what people use.
That's right. There's a lot of parts out there that we look at them and say, "What's that?" But Chris is a home brewer. He knows what the good stuff is. We got an email from Steve, Mike Zero Echo Charlie Sierra. He said that inspired by SolderSmoke, and especially by you, Pete, he recently moved some items, one item in particular, off his own individual shelf of shame. You mentioned the shelf of shame, where projects that you couldn't get working go. Steve didn't a shelf of shame, he had the box of shame, same concept. But he heard us talking about this, he pulled it off, and after many years got the device working. So thanks, woohoo for SolderSmoke, 3 cheers for Pete Giuliano, another item of gear rescued from the box of shame. Jason, KD2RKN, is now building a direct conversion receiver, and he says that it is all our fault. I think mostly your fault recently with the direct conversion receivers. Chris Mannon is a new ham from Indiana, and he is joining the Color Burst Liberation Army. I haven't put it in the mail yet, but I have the envelope here, Chris. I'm going to send you the crystal that will officially induct you into the ranks of the Color Burst Liberation Army. Very good. KC4GMH is listening. Glad to have you aboard. And Ed, N2XDD, another CBLA inductee, has already been armed with a 3.579 megahertz crystal. Ed, this, of course, obligates you, and it's deep moral obligation. It obligates you to build the transmitter, all right? So you can't just let the crystal sit there, gather dust. You got to get the 7 or 8 parts together, build the Michigan Mighty Might, do the right thing. Harvey, WA3EIB, who we correspond with quite a bit. He's another proud owner of an HT37. He has his own personal ham radio museum that he's been building, and that's going along, and he's working. I think he's got like 20 different stations in the museum. Good stuff. I have a few items I might send him. Tim, AG4RZ, is back in the SolderSmoke, and he attributes it to the SolderSmoke podcast. Welcome back, Tim. Melt some solder. Fred, KC5RT, an old friend who has sent us a lot of good stuff over the years. Good to hear from you, Fred. And he recommends the Banggood RF signal generator from China for $88. Does some amazing things. A lot of times we're initially scornful of the stuff coming out of China, but you look around, I got a Rigol scope, you got a Rigol scope, Dean has a Rigol scope, Wes Hayward has a Rigol scope, Farhan has a Rigol scope. Good stuff coming there. And so anyway, Fred recommends we take a look at the Banggood RF signal generator for $88. Shlomo, 4X4LF, is listening and homebrewing from a kibbutz in Israel.
There you go.
I think that's pretty cool. We got somebody homebrewing and listening to the podcast from a kibbutz in Israel. Good luck to you there, Shlomo. And just this week, I got a nice message from Chuck, KF8TI, and he's got a really interesting background in the geological sciences. And he told me that he read the book, the SolderSmoke book, and found a lot of parallels in our life experiences. And he said that when he was in the Philippines, he was a Peace Corps volunteer, and his task was to set up a physics lab for the very poor Philippine community that he was living in. And he talks about some of the things he did using really just the stuff that was available decades ago in the Philippines to get a decent physics lab going. So we'll have more from Chuck, I'm sure. Pete, that's the end of SolderSmoke mailbag. I think that's about it. No, wait. The one thing we forgot to mention. This happened during the trip out to LA. We got contacted by another company. It's like when it rains, it pours. And this is something that at first you and I said, what the heck? But these people, they really pitched us. It was sort of around the time we had the meetings with the suits at the TV company. It's a new company called, get this, what a name, Techie4DAS. The hell is Techie4DAS?
Sort of like TikTok.
Yeah, but Techie4DAS, tat is I guess modern day slang for tattoos, right? Yeah. Now I managed to avoid tattoos during all my years in the Army.
Me too.
And but here we are, and now they're making the special offer. They say the whole idea of this company is tattoos for the technically inclined.
Yes.
No more sunsets or motorcycles or girls' names or broken hearts or mom or any of that stuff. No, they say that we've got a new, more technically inclined community, and so they're specializing in things like formulas. Like they'll put on your shoulder or on your back or on your whatever.
E equals IR, huh?
Yeah, or Maxwell's equations or anything else.
Yeah, there you go.
And they want us to promote this thing. And amazingly, you and I agreed. They put some money on the table and we said, okay. So in the next few weeks, Pete and I are going to go. They have one out there in the LA area. They happen to have one here in the DC area too. And so we're both going to go get Techie4DAS, right? But the thing is, we're not really quite sure what tattoos to get.
Yeah.
I think it should be kind of a heritage, kind of emotional connection there. But it also should be something that helps reinforce the conflict that the TV guys are doing. So for example, I think my tattoo is going to be a Colpitts analog LC oscillator schematic, right? Maybe on my shoulder, right?
Yeah.
Now, and I think you might want to get, I don't know, an Arduino and an SI 5351.
Well, I've been thinking about that.
What are you going to go for?
Well, I was thinking of getting a tattoo of Hedy Lamarr.
Well, that would be good. I mean, you can get
and there's a reason for that.
Why?
She's one of us.
She is. She was. Yes.
Yeah.
And quite a looker too, I must say.
In case you didn't know it, look at your cell phone and thank Hedy Lamarr.
That's right, and I think she's especially kind of interest to you because she laid the groundwork for much of the SDR technology that we're dealing with today.
Yes.
Believe it or not, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
All right, but I still think you need something. So maybe you get Hedy Lamarr on one shoulder, right? And then on the other shoulder, maybe a schematic of some sort. All right, but here's where we turn to our listening audience. Give us some ideas on what we should do. What kind of tattoos should Pete and I get from this new company, Techie4DAS? We got to do it. We're supposed to do it within a month or so. And I've never had a tattoo before. I know you haven't either. But at this point,
maybe a tryout.
Come on. Okay, we can give it a try. What the heck? It could be fun.
A tryout.
Why not? All right. I mean, it's not like you're doing it on your forehead or something. It's on your shoulder. Right? Good. Yeah. Okay, that'd be fine. My kids are always talking about tattoos, so okay, we're gonna get tattoo. Techie4DAS. I'm gonna go either with the. I even thought of it. If I wanted to go even bigger, I thought about getting a tattoo of the entire BitX20 schematic. Might be too much.
Ooh, that'd hurt.
To do your whole back.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe just a Colpitts oscillator. I don't know. I think you should think of something with the SI.
Transistor.
I'm sorry?
A transistor. A point contact transistor.
Single transistor, BJT. Yeah. All right. Well, please, if you have any suggestions in the area, send it to us. We're really interested in what your input on this. Send it to us. SolderSmoke, that's one word, at yahoo.com. Tell us what you think Pete and I should get for our tattoos from Techie4DAS. And we'll get you the website for the Techie4DAS people too. It's a new operation. We'll get it to you soon. Put it
Yeah,
up
you
on the
know
block.
the alternative to the BitX is to put on their Butch Mason rules, because Butch Mason is the inventor of the BitX
Oh
back in
man,
1952. Butch Mason.
Butch
Butch Mason
Mason.
rules. Yes.
All right. I don't know. I think yeah, maybe. We'll think of something like that. Maybe that underneath it there, like where it usually says
Yeah,
mom.
yeah,
That's Butch Mason
there you
rules.
go.
Pete Giuliano, thanks very much for getting up so early out there on the left coast and joining us. Any final words?
Now it's a regular time to get up.
Oh yeah, it's right. It's late in the morning for you these days.
Yeah,
Hang in there, Pete. You're doing great work. It's tough. I know
you
it's
bet.
tough. All right. We'll talk to you on the next podcast, and I will relay to you any of the input that we get from our
Techie
listening
Tats.
audience. 7-3 from Northern Virginia.
7-3s from the left coast.
Thanks a lot, Pete.
Bye bye.